Hello, welcome to the Media Club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. In the club today, Google claims its search business would be fine without news sites. Thanks very much. But does their research stand up to scrutiny? Media writer Jane Martinson is here to tell us more. Also on the programme, TV indies breathe a sigh of relief as a big market investigation is dropped. But it's not so good news for broadcasters. Rebecca Cooney from Broadcast tells us more. All that plus there's a U-turn for BBC Studios, a Bauer retreat from Wales, and in the media quiz we find out how much money Apple TV's losing. That's all coming up in this edition of the Media Club. Come on in. So welcome back to the Media Club. Before we get started into the big stories of the week, Jane Martinson, lovely to have you on the sofa.
Lovely to be here.
You've written extensively about media dynasties, Murdochs, Barclays, any of those in your recommendation to join the club this week?
No. I'm sure there's a few Murdochs already there. No, I want to recommend Jeffrey Goldberg as to join the Media Club because I think he has done a brilliant job as a journalist, not only by his behaviour once being included in this.
So this is the editor of The Atlantic?
Yes. Editor of The Atlantic, who was included apparently completely mistakenly by the US National Security Secretary in this unbelievably high-level signal group, which, is encrypted for those listeners who end-to-end encrypted, so it's sort of seen to be safer and more secure.
Safe-ish.
Safe-ish unless one of the administrators adds a really senior journalist.
Yeah, your house is secure unless you give somebody a key, isn't it?
And welcome them in and then pretend you don't actually know who they are. Yeah. But what I thought was really impressive is one, obviously he stayed silent during this unbelievable sort of evidence. Then he didn't rush to print, which a lot of really irresponsible journalists would have done, because obviously he would have put national service personnel under threat. And then, of course, he did publish and didn't do all the details because, again, he was trying to be, as really a respectable journalist until he was absolutely, the President Trump called him a sleazebag. The people are just real venom. And then he came out with and has published, to all of our great joy, sort of joy, tinged with sadness, the fact that these people who are in charge of, the biggest sort of wealthiest superpower with fingers on the red button sound like sort of frat boys with excited emojis over the fact that many people of Houthis are going to die. So, hats off to him. I think he definitely, if he's not already there, he should be in the Media Club. He should absolutely join.
And he comes over as doing it well, doing it properly, and interestingly, the Trump administration actually started off by sort of admitting, yes, it was a mistake, and yes, this is all true. And then, of course, you have to deny, and they have sort of twisted themselves into odd shapes to try and defend what clearly was classified information that shouldn't be on
Mike
Signal.
Waltz is somehow, there was some suggestion that he was on as JG for his initials, and he thought maybe that was JD. He couldn't really see it properly.
Okay, yes.
Which, as a reason, just seems unbelievable, really.
And also,
do double check that. It just feels like something you should double check.
And then that he didn't know him, even though he obviously had his number in his phone.
Yeah. And also, he's now, of course, appeared in loads of photos with him, whether he was even aware of it. I'm also well done as well for him not joining the chat and going, haha, I'm now printing this, here's a link to my story.
Funnily enough, there has been some criticism among journalists for him leaving voluntarily.
Yes.
And I did think, would I do that? Would I wait for them to kick me out?
Also joining us, Rebecca Cooney. Would you stay in the group or would you leave?
I don't know. I think I might stay in. I think,
I suppose at the time you'd be thinking, I can't believe this, I can't believe this. And so you're sort of waiting for that, and then of course it all comes out.
And I thought his write-up, actually, the article where he said, look, this has happened, was just very well written, because it was quite funny, of just like, this happened and I thought it was a joke, I thought it was a sting, is I being trolled, oh God, this is real. I thought that was just very, very
also,
well done.
If he'd stayed in, he could have been around when it gets relabeled to like JD's 40th birthday party.
Oh my God.
And, who would you like to add to the club this week, Rebecca?
Who would I like to add to the club? Well, so he was on my list. I did think you might pick that one, so I had another one. I think I haven't listened to last week's, I have to admit. So if they're not on last week's, Jack Thorne and Stephen Graham,
yes.
I would like to.
Good ones.
Yes. So the writers of Adolescence.
Have you been enjoying it?
I have. Well, yes. It feels like the wrong
Enjoying
word.
it,
Yes,
inverted commas,
it's an incredible piece of television. It is profoundly depressing, but in a very good way. I think, some of that particularly the episode with the therapist that everyone's talking about is so good. And there were so many, and it's sort of famously all shot in one shot. And I honestly, watching it, every time I remembered it was in one shot, I sort of had like kind of anxiety, secondhand anxiety. Like I'm looking at these guys going, don't mess it up, don't mess it up. And obviously this is the finished take. So yes, and just it's done fantastic numbers, and it just is the thing that everyone's talking about. And that is increasingly difficult to achieve in TV these days. So yeah, I just think well done them. You know, they're having a fantastic, and they're both just brilliant. Like anything Jack Thorne writes, I will watch. Anything Stephen Graham is in, I will happily watch as well. The man, he's a bit like Woody Harrelson, where he doesn't move his face around a whole lot, but he says a lot with it, and I don't know how he does it. It's incredible. And yeah, obviously he contributed to the writing as well. So yeah,
both welcome to join. Absolutely. Okay, first up this week, Google have claimed that news has no measurable impact on its ad revenue. Jane, this is based on an experiment they ran in Europe recently. Did you see what they did?
Well, I mean, they pushed it out, so it was 1% of EU users of their services. They took away 13. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism, obviously, particularly amongst the publishing industry. The law firm suing them for £13 billion for UK publishers for all the content that they have taken and not paid for, have really discredited the survey. Google themselves have said, of course they would, wouldn't they? But it does seem slightly cheap, really. You know, it's a tiny sample. I mean, you've got Google. Surely they could have done bigger numbers. And also, what I was really surprised in that story, not really surprised, but Google's argument, which was that, news content doesn't pay anything. Advertising, which we sort of know, that's an argument that's oft used. Sky, for example, the news site is a loss making because they make loads of money, but it gives lots of other things like kudos and
attract people to the platform,
exactly, and they stay and watch your drama, etc., or sports. What was interesting though, the figures, which was that news is 2%. Well, like say the whole of social media was 4%, and porn was 3%. So actually, that was an incredible number.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually thought that whether or not it's ad revenue attracting, and we all know the reasons why. Advertisers don't like being next to plane crashes, for example, especially if they are EasyJet or another airline. But you can see that has an enormous value just in terms of driving use. So yeah, I don't feel like they really cover themselves with huge glory. Although I think there is an argument there that it's not a major ad revenue driver.
Well, it's interesting because they said, traffic didn't drop off and ad revenue didn't go down, but people didn't know they were in the study. So if you don't know that when you go to Google, you're not going to get news site results, that you think you're going to get them. So you are still being driven there by the news site.
But also, if you search for a story and then it doesn't pop up, what are you going to do anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, you're on Google. You just I think you would assume that, it hasn't been updated yet, or it's not in, or there's a problem, or...
the newspaper I want to look at hasn't written about it, or I'll go to that website and go, hang on, it must have done,
All right, whenever that happens, I mean, I don't know if this is sort of because we're in the media, but I always think, that's because they've not used really good SEO and it's not tracking properly.
Yeah.
Whereas actually then you realise that what they're doing is just maybe not serving you. But you're not saying, Google has taken The Guardian, say, away from its search content and therefore it's not going to the top.
And sometimes I think you blame The Guardian, don't you? They've done something.
Obviously I don't.
Do you think, Rebecca, this is going to... sway the EU regulators who are always looking at Google's dominance?
I don't know, actually. Like you say, it's been so questioned. And, Google are saying, well, the newspapers would say that, wouldn't they? And the newspapers saying, well, Google would say that, wouldn't they? And I feel like if you were a regulator in the middle of that, you'd just kind of go a plague on all your houses.
I mean, Google know that they've got a sort of a useful thing to argue with. They had this in Australia when people were trying to force them to put money into the Australian news industry. There's similar issues in Canada. This is almost like public policy chess. Isn't that right, Jane?
Yeah. There's also, there's a lot of issues in terms of the European fight back against digital platforms, particularly with AI. There's a lot to be played for. I mean, I would say, actually, of all the big tech firms, Google has been far better than Meta, for example, or X. So in terms of sharing something, giving something to publishers, obviously nowhere near enough if you're a publisher. This is all about lobbying, isn't it? This is all about trying to make sure your argument, you're trying to say to publishers, we don't care what you give us. And I mean, the sad thing in many ways is the news publishing acceptance at the very beginning that actually what they needed to do was to give away all their content to Google because they all went for reach. How fabulous it is that you can go from a tiny local or national newspaper and reach a global audience and worry about the consequences of making absolutely no money from that later. Well, we're now living with the consequences of what that is.
All those chickens have come home to roost.
Yeah.
A while back, we spoke about a probe into TV companies, basically looking into whether they were colluding over freelancer fees. Rebecca, thousands of messages and emails were handed over to the CMA, the Competitions and Markets Authority, about this. What's been the result?
So, interestingly, like you say, when the original story broke, the CMA was sort of suggesting, I can't remember the exact wording of the statement, but they were sort of heavily implying that they had evidence of at least 2 instances of rules being broken. They've since come back and said, oh, actually, it's not worth I think they said it's not worth the resources for us to look into this. So essentially, they've dropped the case into a group of independent drama producers and the BBC and ITV. And they they put out a statement which was a little bit like, well, we've spoken to them and we've told them that it would be bad if they were doing this, and that they would get into a lot of trouble, and they understand it's very bad and they're not going to do it.
But they did jump on the sports broadcasters, didn't they? So
they did.
So
yes.
Sky sort of blew the whistle, got out of any fines.
Despite being the worst offender.
Yes, which was definitely jump first to get out of the fire. BBC impacted, ITV impacted. So they decided there was definitely something there.
But also I think those broadcasters did all admit it.
Okay.
And the sports sort of broadcasters and production companies did, I think, admit that there was an issue there. Whereas it's not, as far as I'm aware, the indies have not. The drama indies have not.
Do you think just because they're smaller and it's more difficult to work it out? Yeah,
who knows? Like I said, they suggested they had really good evidence. So, I mean, has that evidence gone away? Has it turned out not to be what they thought it was? I don't know.
Jane, do you think freelancers are being shown enough respect for the work that they do?
Freelancers are never shown enough respect. What was interesting, as Rebecca said, they obviously the CMA was a bit like, almost we can't really be bothered with this now. It seems like a small issue. And Beck too have argued, although of course in journalism, the NUJ, for example, here is the standard rate for a freelance, and actually it's very low. Because that's what's been agreed. And, lots of freelancers will argue if they're only relying on freelance earnings, it's really, really hard to make a living. So the one thing that also really struck me was that in drama at the moment, and we've all, listened to the Peter Kosminski interview, basically there's a crisis in TV drama. And this seems like if the CMA and the government were going to look at anything, this seems like a very small part. But there should be a really proper fulsome review into the funding and financing of British drama. And it's a much bigger thing. So I'm all for freelancers or any creatives actually to be paid a proper wage for doing a great job. But it's a really big issue, this. And this idea of sort of, and it did, as you say, like Sky, the worst offender, sort of fessed up early and then basically didn't get charged with anything. It didn't feel like, it felt like a bit of a review into something they didn't care about particularly. But
telly freelancers have had an incredibly hard time over the last 2 years. This seems like another kick.
Essentially, yes. I think, they've really been affected. They've been on sort of the sharp end of the commissioning slowdown that's happened. There is a real, we're hearing all these sort of stories of very experienced producers who are sort of, taking part-time work, driving Tesco vans or, just going, I just need to make ends meet. So the idea that even when they are getting work, they may not be getting a fair whack is a very is a very difficult kind of pill to swallow.
But does it also, like, the slowdown, the lack of money, the budget cuts, is sort of forcing the TV production companies to go, not what's the lowest we can get away with, but like, budgets are tough, what are people being paid elsewhere, and it's driving them to make those decisions without thinking, oh, this is sort of collusion?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. Yeah. I think certainly every time in broadcast we have an interview with a production company where they talk about, we managed to do this on the cheap. We get a lot of criticism on social media from freelancers going, so what you're saying is they're screwing us and you're kind of lauding them for that. Yes. Which is difficult because, is that always what's happening? No, they've probably, made savings elsewhere. But that probably is what's happening as well. And that is really difficult because these production companies are struggling to stay in business. There's precious little work out there, and where there is the tariffs are not what they would want them to be to make it. It's a really difficult situation at the moment.
I also think, it is a really tough market, as we've discussed, but it's also, I think, the working conditions, as you know much better, and have alluded to, are really bad. I talk to, TV production companies where there's no HR facility. There's kind of sort of bad behaviour, bullying, not being paid for the work you've done, being sort of let go after 6 months and not seeing the fruits of your labour because of the economic model is a bit tricky. And these things go on all the time.
And also, I think we've talked about a little bit before, you've got this challenge where if you are working, you don't want to rock the boat because you've got a job, and that not a lot of your colleagues do. Okay, finally, just before the break, after a backlash from all sides, BBC Studios has withdrawn plans to add adverts to podcasts in the UK. This is sort of off of BBC, not on BBC Sounds, but on platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Jane, this felt like a sort of slight misstep by the BBC at the time. It sort of came from nowhere. Are they right to go, oh, actually, yes, maybe we shouldn't have announced that?
The big thing for me was that I think this shows how very difficult it is for the BBC to make money without licence fee model. We're over the many, many years, I've personally been thinking about BBC funding, the pressure on them to make money, to charge. Even when, you're overseas and accessing BBC content, there's a criticism of them charging anything for BBC studio content overseas. And then I can see why the commercial radio, obviously, and podcast groups absolutely did not want this to happen. And I think the BBC did it in a very BBC way, which was, we're going to do this. No consultation, no sense of why it might be really, really difficult. But as I say, they need to really think about how are they going to make this. Was not the way, but it did strike me that it's always very difficult for them to work in another commercial area and not be incredibly criticised for it.
I thought it was strange. They could have, it wouldn't make loads of money. It would make some money, but the BBC content, a lot of newsy content, it's not the stuff that people really want to advertise in. And two, they've sort of, have they kept their powder dry for licence fee negotiation? Actually, you could have added it into the next term. I think there's some interesting stuff this week. BBC Studios have got a new F1 show, I think, coming out that's not going to be a PSB BBC, and it's just more a commercial thing. She's very akin to UK TV. UK TV owned by the BBC. They commission new programmes that sits on ad-funded channels. Is it trying to mix the streams when it goes a bit wrong?
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes it feels like the BBC will focus on one criticism at a time. So that's, you're not competitive enough, you're not commercial enough. Here's us being commercial, and then kind of forget that everyone else is going, yeah, but you're this huge beast in the media market. Anyway, you put a foot down is going to squash somebody. And I think it is just that sort of trying to balance out, whereas at least UK TV is sort of hived off to one side, isn't it? Which obviously BBC Studios is a slightly separate entity as well. But yeah, I think it is just a tricky one. Whichever way they move, they're going to squash somebody.
Yeah. Well, the licence fee conversations never stop. We will return to it.
As you say, though, if they've just rolled it into this massive debate they're about to have, it may not seem like such a random decision.
Yeah. Also, can we stop BBC commissioners appearing on BBC podcasts extolling the virtues of BBC Sounds? It's a terrible creative. It should never have been there. Maybe we can stop and do something else. Right, speaking of ads, join us after the break. More stories to come and the media quiz. We'll see you in a sec.
Hello Media Club listeners, Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company, where this week we've been thinking about press appearances. How do you get on live radio? Is it really just about knowing who to call? How many people are actually listening? And what about TV and print? To speak to us about PR or anything else to do with podcast marketing, head to podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
Here at the Media Club, we pride ourselves on staying up to date with the latest stories and trends, but that leaves us with less time to handle all the technical aspects of the show. That's where Podshop comes in. Their Shoreditch studio offers a reliable setup that makes it super simple to create a fast turnaround show at a high quality. From selecting the right equipment to managing the recording, Podshop takes the hassle out of podcasting so we can stay focused on what really matters, delivering great content. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned pro, Podshop ensures your podcast sounds great and helps you come across the expert that you are. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your first booking at Podshop by using the code MEDIACLUB. That's the code MEDIACLUB at podshoponline.co.uk. Welcome back. Here's what we've been talking about in the Media Club this week. The Independent is to launch a new AI service for time-poor audiences. It's called Bulletin. Will be no longer than 140 words long. Maybe they can just run the AI over old CFAX stories, and that'll help them with that. Capital Breakfast co-host Chris Stark has returned to work after a routine checkup resulted in a testicular cancer diagnosis. In between bouts of chemotherapy, he's been on the This Morning couch, telling viewers he feels like an idiot for putting the appointment off. And radio group Bauer announced last week that the Hits Radio Breakfast Show will lose its local versions and become one show across the nations. The move means Bauer will have no physical base in Wales, and that plans to update the famous Radio City Tower in Liverpool have been abandoned too. Links to all those stories and more available on our Substack. It's free to sign up. Just go to themediaclub.com. That's themediaclub.com. Jane and Rebecca are still with me. So sort of staying with local radio, Global have made a lot of these changes, these rules have changed so they can relax their local programming. Bauer's maybe taken a bit longer to make the same decision. Rebecca, James Cridland wrote this week that whilst this is probably the end of local commercial radio, something is lost when there won't be a local accent on air, nor a knowing mention of the M62 at this time of night, or slipping in a song for people coming back from the Steelers game. That's a shame. Do you agree?
Yeah, I thought that was a really lovely piece, actually. And his point with that kind of that bit that you just quoted was that it's not just about things being local for the sake of it. It's about relevance to people's lives and that sort of sense of, I guess it's that sense of community, isn't it? In the sort of wider sense of people sort of, being able to relate to what they're hearing and feeling like it does relate to their lives. So, yeah, I think, and I mean, the accents thing as well seems like a very particular thing as well, because I think, we do have more regional accents on TV, on radio than we used to, but I still think that was where people, were hearing people that sounded like them, and actually it's where people were cutting their teeth as well, right? And that's something that's happened in print journalism, that you used to be able to get work at your local paper, and then you would work your way up to national, and that chain has kind of fallen apart. So yeah, I think he's absolutely right, and I thought that was a really lovely way to put it. But
Jane, that radio was sort of over-regulated, internet competition. Look what ITV's done, local newspapers have done. Surely they should be able to run their businesses kind of how they like.
No, I think one of the absolutely most disastrous things about what's happened to the media in the last 20 years has been the death, really, the collapse of local content. I think it really matters. I know of course, there is a commercial imperative, but that's why the media is so regulated. That's why there's always been... if you just look at the local newspaper industry and what, Johnston Press literally took all that money out and paid loads to shareholders and executives and just killed the local businesses. And the lack of local voices, and I know that Bauer and Global have sort of provided more of a global, and I agree, James Cridland's piece was really good. A regional content.
Yeah, there's still local news on those radio stations.
Yeah. But it's still much more likely to be a shared service. There's no, it may be the M62, but there's definitely not the B414 that's just been closed by something terrible happening. And I think that is it. I actually think it's sort of there's a democratic deficit and the lack of local reporters and local content, stories that people can hear. It's not being provided by newspapers anymore, and it's not being provided by radio in the same way. I mean, fortunately, there are these great new sort of startups and ideas. I'm about to do a session at a journalism festival with Jossie Herman, Mill Media, who set up a great organisation in Manchester.
Jim Watson's London
My
Centric.
former colleague,
Yes.
Jim. Yeah. So it's just, that's brilliant. But we need more of that. And to support the people like Jim and Jossie that are doing what they do.
Rebecca, we've just got to find new models for this. Should we not leave it up to the big groups to come up with something innovative?
Yes, if anybody knows what they are, perhaps they could send them in to us. I think it is that difficulty of not knowing how to have a sustainable model that is local, that is small scale, that is accessible. And I think that is a problem across the media, right?
Yeah.
It's, how do we make the internet pay?
Yeah.
It's still.
But I think if you think of like the value of, and you only have to look back to that Liz Truss interview, and trying to divvy out those local broadcasters. They were presenters on some breakfast shows. Some, the local presenter did amazing jobs at saying, we represent the people who live here. They don't live in London. And this is what we want to ask you. And they were amazing. And it just seems such a tragedy that we don't have a business model that can pay for that.
I also think there's a big question about talent and what that talent pipeline is. And radio has always attracted people from telly and other places. And I think that's absolutely fine. But they will want some great jocks in the middle of the day or on their spin-off radio stations. Where do those people come from? And I think for those big radio groups and for the BBC, if you're not going to do it on air, what are you going to put in place to ensure that, you look after yourselves, but you help build talent for the industry too? Well, some people that are being celebrated for being talented are those who are in the new BAFTA nominations that have just come out. This is for the TV Awards. This is for shows in 2024. Rebecca, who are some of the big shows that have been nominated?
So Baby Reindeer has absolutely, I think so. They've got 8 nominations going on. And it's the TV and craft awards. And so there's writer, there's a load of kind of craft ones about sort of editing and design. And then of course you've got your lead actor, weirdly, Jessica Gunning. It was the same for the RTS awards as well. She's up for best supporting actress or actor in a female role, which I find a bit odd actually, because I was thinking, well, she carries that show. She has as much screen time as he does, I think, or certainly she looms as large in the show. So I was quite surprised by that. But yeah, so she's up for it. And then we've also got Rivals and Slow Horses.
Yes.
So and then obviously.
And a bit of Mr. Bates.
And a bit of Mr. Bates.
I feel like Mr. Bates has constantly won awards for seemingly forever. This is the final round for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. At the RTS Awards, there was, I forget which show, because I was at it the other night, and I forget which award it was, but there was one where you kind of went, Mr. Bates will definitely get this. And it went to somebody else.
Right.
And I was like, is that a kind of judges have seen so much of it now, or it's so long ago, people are like, we should give, and they've seen it win other awards, they're thinking, we should give something else a go. But you just wonder if BAFTA are going to want to go, no, but this was the show that proved the value of TV, that everybody talked about, that had that cut through. So yeah, I think you can't, because there's I think these are all streaming shows that have Slow Horses, Rivals, and Baby Reindeer, all streamer shows, which is, really impressive. Mr. Bates there just flying the flag for a PSB, and I don't think you can write it off.
Jane's been lots of award ceremonies recently. What have you been to?
Well, I didn't go to this week's programming awards, but I a couple of weeks ago went to the RTS Journalism Awards. Brilliant, incredible event, loads of great winners. But one of the sort of controversies on the night, the number of panels where they had suggested journalists in Gaza as worthy of a special award, and it wasn't awarded on the night. And there was a note from the chair of judges saying that because of the sort of controversy and what was going on in Gaza, and I mean, for journalists to feel like they should back away from a controversy when the fact that any content came out of there was astonishing. But then I hear that actually RTS must have, I don't know enough, I don't know if you can help us, Rebecca, on that. Why did they then decide they would do it on the television awards?
Yeah, I mean, I've got no insight into the decision-making process there, but I will say I was at the programming awards, and yeah, they sort of at the beginning they sort of had, we had a speech from Jane Martinson, a speech from Kenton Allen, and then they sort of went, and then we've got this special award for journalists in Gaza. Everybody applaud, and it was a bit kind of abrupt, actually.
Yes.
It was a weird sort of placing of just like, oh, I didn't know this was happening. Oh, yes, journalists in Gaza, that's great. And it did just feel like, it felt like okay, we better get this in.
Yeah.
I couldn't speak to the thinking of that. I couldn't speak to whether or not that is what they...
Well, I know there was a fuss at the end because
Yeah.
there were lots of people saying, we thought journalists in Gaza were going to get an award, and then they decided not to at the last minute and sent a note round saying, we think it's a bit tricky right now. And I think that probably led to, but as you say, you can imagine it feels like the wrong place for a special award for journalists in Gaza. But anyway, at least they did it, I suppose.
Yes.
So.
And join us after the break when we'll see who'll succeed in the media quiz. Welcome back. Just enough time to see how much attention our guests have been paying to the media news this week. And the quiz we're going to be doing is backward headlines. This is when producer Matt is unable to make a clear connection between all the stories. And this is basically his fallback. You need to identify the story from these headlines, which I will read backwards. Don't worry, Jane, you'll pick it up. It's a best of three. Buzz in with your name if you know the answer. So Rebecca, you will say...
Rebecca.
And Jane, you will say...
Jane.
Let's play backwards headlines. Right, question number one. History. Ratings. Makes.
Jane.
Rebecca.
Oh,
Jane did it first.
Is this the story that adolescents, the Netflix drama, for the first time, made history by being top of the TV charts in the UK, and made by a streamer?
Yes,
in
and
this case,
regular Barb charts, which has all the regular shows on. Streamers could always be in it for the last couple of years, but they finally made it to the top. It's pretty impressive, Rebecca, to get there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And
Crown
it was like,
didn't make it, other shows didn't make it.
Yeah, and it was like the first show, it was something like the most streamed show for a week, like the most streams in a week for any show ever. It's really impressive. And again, it is just that, Netflix is kind of, because we talk about Netflix a lot and, it's in the lexicon, but they don't generally have the same numbers as the PSBs. And yet here they were just, smashing it.
And as you say, incredible really that it was this sort of, 4-part, very difficult drama actually.
Yeah.
And not The Crown or something, some entertainment that the whole world you would think, well, it seemed to be really interested in at the time.
And they were pushing it, but like it has just taken off in a way that kind of, I don't know that you could have predicted it would take off this much. It's really just caught something in the zeitgeist.
The producers seemed a bit surprised.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, Jack Thorne was sort of on a lot of interviews going, oh, yes, it's quite something, isn't it?
Okay, question number two. Coordinators. Intimacy.
Oh, Rebecca. This is Gwyneth Paltrow sounding off about intimacy coordinators.
Yes, what she said.
So she essentially said that. So she was filming her latest film and with Timothée Chalamet, and she sort of commented that she'd sort of had to ask the intimacy coordinator to sort of back off a bit, and that it wasn't really necessary, and kind of that I think there's a bit of a feeling that she's sort of we always just took our clothes on and off and got on with it.
I'm a grown up. I can do this,
I don't need you interfering. And I thought, Caroline Hollick, who's the ex-drama controller at Channel 4, kind of said, like this is really irresponsible and unhelpful and culture war-y. And I think she's right, actually. I think, it sort of occurred to me that like if Paltrow had sort of been filming and there was somebody with a boom mic over her head that was a little bit too enthusiastic, she would not have told the press about how the sound engineer got on her nerves. Do you know what I mean? It's this, and I think, okay, you've had a decent experience previously in Hollywood. Which also, she hasn't, because she was involved in the Harvey Weinstein stuff, right? Like she was one of the people that spoke out against him. But like in terms of clearly sex on screen, she's been okay. So nobody needs it is a bit of a leap to make, and you just think, I'm glad you've had good experiences on that front, but not everybody has, and it doesn't seem wrong to have somebody there, even if you kind of want to say, thanks, I'll take it from here. You should have the option, and other people with less clout than you should have the option.
I was surprised, one, it had taken as long as it has for anyone to criticise, because she said some comment about, it was almost like I grew up at a time when we just took our clothes off and got on with it. Which was it, but it's also it's quite complicated, this, because she did actually go public against Harvey Weinstein, and was quite brave in doing so at the time. I
Yeah.
mean, not one of the original women, but, you know, she did use her clout. It seems like such a backward step. I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but there was part of me thinking, this is some kind of, you know, this is promoting her return to the movies, which you'd think she would not need, and you don't need it if you've got someone like Chalamet, who's like this hot property.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't win the Oscar, you know, it seemed a bit odd that she did that anyway.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, I'm glad Timothy Chalamet seems to be nice. Like, that's good. I every time I describe a famous man as being, he seems nice.
something terrible happens.
So, you know.
Take it
We'll
back.
clip that and use it later.
Yeah.
Final question. Question number 3. Right. Reports. Year. A billion. One.
Oh, Rebecca.
Over. Yes.
This is Apple loses over $1 billion a year.
Yeah.
Apple TV Plus loses over $1 billion a year.
Dollars a year.
Yes.
No great surprise, is it, Jane?
Well, I mean, I thought that story was quite interesting. That it's obviously they've had some great successes. You know, Slow Horses were mentioned, but they're so much smaller than Netflix and their big rivals, Disney, whatever. But also, I mean, Apple really are making a lot of money from other things like their phones.
Yeah, they want to sell you a phone, right? They don't actually,
Laptops.
you know.
Yeah, there's so much. They make so much money that really $1 billion on what is effectively, you know, feel good promotional content. I don't know. I can't imagine they're all really desperate, but we shall see if they start obviously selling off their TV business.
Yeah, I think they're fine. I don't think we have to worry about Apple. Congratulations, Rebecca. You did very well there. You get to help us win more awards next year. You seem like you've been to enough awards ceremonies.
Okay, cool. That sounds good.
So come back with your report later on.
I'm always just applauding for my supper rather than actually getting up on stage, so why not?
Well, thank you both for joining us. Jane, how can people keep up with your work?
Well, I wrote a column for The Guardian, and I have moved on to Blue Sky. Jane Martinson. Occasionally I do still post on X, but yeah.
Good. And Rebecca?
Rebecca Cooney on Blue Sky and at Any Name But Becky on Instagram. And you can check out the broadcast website, broadcastnow.co.uk, which has the results of our latest indie survey up. That's the big thing that I'm doing at the moment, where we've polled as many indies as we possibly can to work out how it's going for the indie sector. So the results that are out today. So.
We'll go and check that out at broadcastnow.co.uk. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you too for joining us. Remember, head over to the Substack at themediaclub.com. Sign up, get links to all of our stories, and also we get to find out a bit more about you. My name is Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. It was a Rethink audio production with video support from Podcast Discovery. I'll see you next time.